Hello, everybody. This will be chapter 2 of Ancient Dacia by Nikolai Densushanu analysis. It will be very interesting if you care about the origins of humanity. Alright, so if you haven't listened or watched chapter 2, part 1 and part 2, I recommend you do that to better understand this. If you haven't, I pretty much covered the basic points anyways. Here I go. So, chapter 2 tells us there was a neolithic invasion after some flood that happened at the end of chapter 1. If you recall, in chapter 1, the main topic was animals of antiquity that were relatively large based on modern day animal size, and in some cases animals lived where they don't live today anymore. They are essentially extinct today. Like, for example, the cave lions in southeastern Europe, or the massive Bos urus, the massive bull. Chapter 2 introduces us to two races of humans. The first one is called dolichocephaly, and this means elongated skulls. Now, if you are unaware what a dolichocephaly skull looks like, the leading authority on the subject is Brian Forster. I highly recommend you watch this video, the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, and their DNA. He essentially links them to the Black Sea area. These are elongated skulls. These skulls this is head bounding. This is head binding. This is head binding. Okay? These are not elongated skulls. These are people or cultures trying to mimic these skulls. If you look very well at this skull, this is natural. This unnatural. You cannot get this by head binding. Natural. Natural. So that's what dolichocephaly means, okay? Elongated skulls. And in case you forgot, I made some videos about Aryanism. The main topic of the early church and the seven ecumenical councils which tried to establish the Trinity versus the non-Trinity. The one who defended Arianism was Arius, this individual. And if you look at his skull, it's elongated. Another individual was the Goth. Theodoric the Great. Theodoric the Great. If you look at his medallion, see how the hair is pointing straight upwards? That's an elongated skull. He was an Ostrogoth, and if you've been following me, the Goths are really the Getae. The Getae come from this area. Whoops. What just happened? Am I not allowed to show this? But if you look over here, it says Getarum Terra. It's pretty much the land of the Geats. But in reality, if you notice here, at the border with Thracia, there's the word Easter. Easter is the old denomination for the Danube, which is the river that flows from Germany all the way to the Black Sea. The Black Sea was known as the Pontus Euxine in the past. Pretty much everyone north of this river was Getian. A lot of the Thracians were Getian as well. In the beginning, everybody was Pelasgian. So in essence, the Geats or the Goths and whatever other names they had were the bloodline of the Pelasgians that survived after the Great Flood. The bloodline of Arimaeus, known as Prometheus, or Mithra, or Zalmoxis. So, they had elongated skulls, dolichocephaly. They had superior intelligence, they had great ideas, powerful ideas, evolved social instincts. They were a patriarchal society. This is the culture they brought with them, and they had a scientific perception of reality based on logical findings. And according to Deng Xiaoyu, they came from central plains of Asia to Europe. And the first tribes were immense masses who were agricultural and pastoral. They came probably in the Paleolithic from the plains near the Altai Mountains. Now, I drew this triangle to represent the area he speaks of. I believe on the next slide. He says they settled for hundreds of years near the Caspian Sea and lower Urals. So they came from this area, somewhere around here, according to Deng Xiaoyu, and they moved outwards, westwards, in this general pattern towards what he says the South Urals, which is this mountain range, and the north of the Caspian Sea. So this corridor marks their first migration from the base of the Altai Mountains. I apologize, my laptop is a little bit slow because I have so many things open right now. They moved through Moldova up to Wallachia. Okay, so they moved in this general triangle area. They were here for a few hundred years. Then after that, they had another migration, or at least continuation of their migration towards Europe, towards the Carpathian Mountains. And they went through what would be Moldova today, and then up to Wallachia, which is this area today. If you see a Romanian Sphinx almost right there, that's kind of like board. So the mountains themselves are like halfway between Wallachia and Transylvania, and both are Romania today. This is where they set up the first center of civilization above the lower Danube. This light blue line, if you notice it, I drew that to mark the course of the Danube. The lower Danube would be the section close to the Black Sea, and the upper Danube would be the section in Germany. The meridional would be the halfway point. So when he speaks of the lower Danube, setting up civilization above the lower Danube, and obviously, if they're agricultural and pastoral, they're not going into the mountains quite yet. They're taking advantage of these plains. And as you can see today, this massive city right here is actually the capital of Romania, which is known as Bucharest. If you notice, there are still many areas that have quite a significant amount of lakes, which means a lot of freshwater sources, a lot of vegetation to feed the sheep or the cows or whatever animals they had with their herds. Most of this area today is agricultural, like there's the culture of corn and cereals and textiles and all that stuff. So in other words, this area in modern day is still very similar to how it was when the initial Pelasgian migration occurred. This is where the center of Pelasgian civilization was. So just above the Danube and just below the Carpathian Mountains. This is the area where Atlantis was, if you recall that video. If you recall, the Romanian Sphinx is the petrified or simulacrum head of Saturn or El, the god of Genesis in the Old Testament. So chances are there could still be a lot of elongated skull skeletons in the ground all over this area. I know in the 1800s, 1900s, the Jesuit influence, which took place all over the world, collected most of these skulls that were found, similar to how the Smithsonian did the same thing in the United States. Again, Jesuit influences. But this is it. This is where civilization started. At least on Terra. From there, so these humans were of tall stature and vigorous with all patriarchal organization. Now here's the thing. They're already patriarchal, these Pelasgians. But over the years in my research of old or ancient civilizations, I know there was matriarchal civilizations as well. So the question is, which one was patriarchal first and which was first, the patriarch or the matriarch? For now, a side note on this topic is the Queen Tomiris, whom the city Tomis is based on. I was watching the movie 300 last night. I will continue watching it today. It speaks about the Spartans and the 300 that held the Xerxes invasion from taking over Europe, pretty much. But the reality is the Persian Empire wanted to enter Europe since the time of Cyrus the Great. And the one that stopped them was Queen Tomiris. Queen Tomiris belonged to the Amazons. The Amazons were the wives of the Geats, or the Getae. And they developed their own matriarchal society when the males went to other places, started new families or whatever, or so they say. In other words, there was an entire empire, especially in Minor Asia, that was developed, who saw the rule of women, such as Queen Tomiris. I will go into more detail about this when I cover the Getica by Jordanes and about the barbarian origins by Nicolo Zeno. So the idea is there was a historical matriarchal society which we identify as the Amazons today. They were matriarchal. So perhaps the patriarch was first after all. Who knows? They had severe religious ideas. So keep in mind, this whole chapter is mainly speaking about these dolichocephaly Pelasgians, or elongated skull people. In fact, the whole book is mostly about that. They sculpted in stone massive statues of their divinities. It's very possible sculpted can be interchangeable with became the statues at some point in the future, to be covered at some point in the future. They brought and spread the first elements of civilization in Europe. They gave new direction for the destiny of humanity. Well, this implies that humanity already existed here even before the Pelasgians showed up. So, what did humanity look like or act like prior to their arrival? I'll cover that as well in the future. Over hundreds of years, they expanded towards the meridional areas of the Danube. The meridional areas is this area. So the light red first represents the first migration from the Altai all the way down to the second migration, which took place towards this area, which is between the lower Danube and the Carpathian Mountains. And then from this point, they went towards the middle section of the Danube. So in essence, they followed the plains, also known as the Pannonic Plains in this area. Obviously, if you have large herds of animals, you want to have as flat land as possible for them to feed on, assuming it is fertile. Then they expanded towards the Balkanic Peninsula. Now, the Balkanic Peninsula is pretty much this area, south of the lower Danube. The Balkans are named after the Balkan Mountains, but it's really this whole area, which includes Minor Asia, Greece, what used to be Thrace and Macedonia, Illyria, Dalmatia, this whole area of modern day Europe. So, as you'll notice in Greek mythology, a lot of stories come from these areas. Ironically, the Pelasgian stories also come from these areas quite a bit, but also from everywhere else. This light pinkish color, I don't even know what to call it, represents the volcanic area, and it's also titled the Carpathian Mycena Current because they came from the Carpathians to all the way south to this area. What's next? The Old Pelasgian current, which is also known as the Paleophthon current, they consider themselves as born right out of the earth. How are they born right out of the earth? They came out of the earth, right? Remember my video about Peschera caves, inner earth, if you will? You should watch that video too. After their first migratory waves, there were more migratory waves which took the northern Carpathian paths into the rest of Europe. And that is represented by the blue lines. So they went north of the Carpathians, followed the course of the Danube, then they went towards Germany, some of them went towards Spain, again at the base of the Noric Alps, this is what they were called, this mountain range, the Alps of today. And I believe these are the Pyrenees, but I'm not sure. So everywhere there was plains and fertile land, they colonized all of Europe. Some of them settled in this area by the Tisa. And this current is characterized by the darker blue lines, which I drew. So the first migration was called the Carpathian Pannonian Alpine, the second migration Carpathian Galician. These are actually sub-migrations of the second big migration. So the first one went towards the Balkanic Peninsula, and the second wave had two sections, one which went towards Galicia and one towards Pannonia and the Alpine mountains. These migrations introduced the same culture as introduced in the Dacian Carpathians all over Europe, same industrial progress, same pastoral way of life, same agricultural practice, same religious doctrine, same culture and society, same ideology, same culture. There were further waves of migrations that came from the Altai Mountains. So again, it makes you wonder, this migration from the Altai Mountains, or the plains near the Altai Mountains, is it really the plains, or is it something else? Because if it's something else, like such as the caves or tunnel systems underneath the earth, then you could in theory say it's a different dimension or a different level of reality coming from below upwards. Just something to think about. So this later migratory waves can no longer follow the same path, so they went north towards the Baltic Sea and towards coastline of northern Germany. This is represented by the orange lines. So they kind of went this way. This is the Baltic Sea. And this is the coastline all the way to Germany. And it's very possible at this time they also went towards this area and further north, Norway, whatever. They pretty much colonized this whole area. So now you got it. First wave this way towards Greece, kind of, and Minor Asia. Second wave Pannonia, the center part of the Carpathians, and towards modern day Spain and Portugal. And then the third wave north towards the Baltic Sea and the coastline of northern Europe. And you can understand now why in England especially there were subsections of populations like the Irish, the Welsh, and the English, because some came here from one direction, some came here from different directions, and they all met up at the end of the world, if you will. Back in those days, it probably was the end of the world. Anyways, the second migration, I mean, this this northern current migration, sorry, is not just dolichocephaly like the first two waves were. This also consisted of brachycephaly humans, or shortened skull, or actually people like us, Homo sapiens sapiens. And these people, unlike the other dolichocephaly humans, were simple hunters and fishermen, and they had no importance in this epoch. So they settled in the northern parts of Europe, and if you research what is said in the Getica by Jordanes, there is talk of an island called Scandia. Scandia, whatever you want to call it. The island at the mouth of the Vistula River. Vistula River. Vistula River, Poland. So if you follow this Vistula River upwards to the mouth, here's the mouth. So if you go north from here, there's an island, which could possibly be here, or it could be this one. What country is this? What country are you? What country? Is it Norway? No, it's not Norway. Finland? Island in Baltic Sea. Gotland? Oh, there's still Gotland? Wow, for reals? Let's see, Gotland. There we go, Gothland. So why is this important? If you read the Jatica by Jordanes, and also about the barbarian origins by Nicolo Zeno, I think it was Nicolo Zeno that said this. After the Great Flood, Noah settled in this country, in this area, right? And this is where he had his 4 sons. And from this island, his 4 sons went outwards and populated all of Europe, one of them becoming the father of the Geats in the Carpathian Mountains. So, in other words, what I just showed you in this video was the Pelasgian migration from the Altai Mountains of the dolichocephaly elongated skull humans. And then there was a great flood, and they got all wiped out, but not quite, because as you saw before, elongated skull people lived until at least 500 AD with Theodoric the Great. But then when his bloodline died, they probably died too. Anywho, after the Great Flood, Noe, or the sons of Noe, or Noah, survived, the 4 sons, and they're the ones that pretty much repopulated Europe and Minor Asia and whatever came afterwards. But the idea is, if you follow what Dan Sushano was saying, where he mentions the Baltic, the northern current migration included dolichocephalic and brachycephalic people, then it makes a whole lot of sense that after the Great Flood, only the brachycephalic, or the shortened skull, like us, people survived and went back outwards when the waters probably receded or something. Now, it's also very possible our interpretation of flood is incorrect. It's also very possible our interpretation of up and down, north and south, east and west is wrong. It's very possible that Gothiscandia is actually in the sky, like different layers of reality caked upon each other. But for now, let's stick to this. Now you may think, if the Goths were in the Carpathian Mountains and they were the Dacians, why is there to today an island called Gothland, which is literally Goth land, or land of the Goths? Today, I, I hope one day I can visit this place. I wonder what's in the ground. Ooh, baby. Look at that. Farms everywhere. Few minor cities and bunch of farms everywhere. Do these people even know the history of this land? Anyways, don't want to deviate too much. So the conclusion is that these migrations happened long before the migration to Europe of the Greeks or the Hellenic people or the Celts or the Germans. And the signs are all over Europe of this Pelasgian culture. Now, I presented what Densuchanu says as the migration coming from the central plains of Asia close to the base of the Altai Mountains. Here are some maps of the general migrations accepted today. Expansion of agriculture from the Middle East to Europe. That's one thing you will notice a lot today. A lot of them say they came from Africa or the Middle East and from there went to Europe. That's incorrect. Based on what Densuchanu says and his sources. There's the Kukuten culture. Now, it's funny that they name these Dnieper, Donetsk, Kama, Khvalynsk, Narva, linear pottery culture, Cardian pottery, Chalcolithic Near East, Let me repeat, because this is super important. These migrations, regardless of which wave it was, introduced the same culture as introduced in the Dacian Carpathians all over Europe. Same industrial progress, same pastoral way of life, same agricultural practice, same religious doctrine, same culture and society, same ideology, same language, the Proto-Latin or Pelasgic. In other words, whatever modern science labels these cultures as, they're the same culture. Originally, they are the same culture. And in time, they became, as they remained isolated and further invasions occurred and mixing of more bloodlines, in time, they became different. But at the base, they are all the same culture. And regardless of what they all say, what modern science says, this culture here, look at that, where it says Old Europe, that was the cradle of civilization. From here, culture spread all the way to Europe, all the way north towards Russia, modern day, and the Baltic countries, and towards the Middle East, and towards Africa, Northern Africa, Egypt, the Nile, and so forth. And then you get the Kukuten Tripiliony. Yes. So, going back to the map, cradle of civilization. Right here, in this area. The mountains themselves, the Hyperborean Mountains, also known as the Ripae Mountains. Just so you understand clearly, I was looking at a map of Jetarum Terra, which was the land of the Dacians. If you look closely, the mountains are called the Ripae Mountains. They're the Rephaim from the Old Testament, and these mountains is where the Atlanteans, the Hyperboreans, all the great civilizations of the past lived, because obviously this was the start of civilization. So they came out of the ground, they migrated all the way over here. Here they established in this fertile plains first civilization, and from here they spread everywhere else. What else we got? As you notice, there is Troy. Pay attention because the Trojan culture, very important, especially in the time of the Greeks, or the Hellenics rather, because the Trojans were, in a sense, the first line of attack or defense versus the invader tribes of the Hellenics, the what were they called? The Celts and the Germans. Now, the Germans and the Celts may have Goth in them too. So we have to clearly understand what the heck happened after the Great Flood in time, but for now, let's just focus on this Pelasgian time. And why is it important? Because Proto-Latin was the language everywhere, and everywhere you go in the world today, there are still root words that come from Proto-Latin or Pelasgian, including English. There are so many English words. Now, I could spend all day long looking at every single neolithic culture to try to understand their pottery and weapons, instruments, kind of like was mentioned by Densushanu in part 2 of chapter 2 in his additional notes. The only thing I'm going to do right now is look at Kukulkan Tripillion culture, because obviously that's the start. So let me close what's slowing down my laptop real quick. Didn't save you? Kukulkan Tripillion. Kukulkan Potter. Look at that. Jackpot. Jackpot. If you want to, wow, look at that. Young Shao. That's Asian. And Kukulkan. So, what I'm starting to think now is, at the same time there was a migration towards Europe from what seems to be the central plains of Asia, or born out of the ground, if you will. Similar waves went not only towards Europe, but they also went towards Asia in terms of what we know as China today and the countries surrounding China, and also somehow, possibly through a different migration route or similar migration route, but extended, they got to the Americas as well. And because they started their migrations from the same source, that is why the earliest pottery looks very similar, regardless of where we are in the world. So, oh, look at that, the swastika symbols. So many of them. Holy crap. What is this? Castro de Santa Trega. I have no idea what this is. Galicia. Hmm. So that's close to where Spain is at. That's fascinating. So the same pictures I was showing you in part two are now in color. Woo woo. Look at this one. This has a design. I had to click on Wikipedia again. Bastards. That's a bowl. Kukutani Shrine. Interesting. Bullhorn design. Now what makes this bullhorn design? Anthropomorphic figure. That is trippy. It makes you really question what these people really looked like, even though they had elongated skulls. Because remember, I think they were more ethereal than we are. Personally, based on all I've researched, I believe they were more ethereal. In other words, different physical density, different atmosphere, different oxygen content. And what seems as physically solid today was possibly physically not so solid before. Look at that. Look at this. Ritual vessel discovered at Gela Ish containing four clay figurines. So tall peoples, skinny. Where are the arms at? Do these people not have arms? Goddess design earrings. That looks like. Oh, she's holding the arms up. That's crazy. Again, where are the arms at? There's the arms. That is so trippy. One, two, three, four. Their fingers are like branches. So on my travels, I am hoping to discover a lot more clear evidence than this of who they were. But looking at these, I'm starting to believe soul beings literally took the material of the earth, clay if you want to call it that, and water, mixed it together, and made vessels for their souls. And in time, through encoding, if you will, or genetics, they developed the features they wanted to possess, the features that later became what we are today. So, there you have it. The migration of the Pelasgians who came out of the ground in the central plains of Asia, supposedly, and went towards Europe. So this makes me wonder if if European history is so rich, so chronicled, if you will, if there's so many artifacts, why isn't the same true for like the Chinese side, the Asian side? Or maybe it is, but it's kept better hidden because of communism and interesting. Apologize, I'm thinking out loud. I'm just gonna show a few more examples here, then I'm gonna close this video. Look at that. Wow. To me, this looks like a petrified head. They say goddess. Why would you? It really seems to me like these first cultures were creating avatars out of available raw materials, bodies that they could insert their life source or consciousness into. And then once they were in these primitive bodies, they were able to develop through what would later become metallurgy or gold mining in general. They were able to develop better bodies. That's a crazy thought. So if that is true, then that means that our current bodies are the pinnacle of evolution, but we don't know how to use them. In other words, we're more powerful than the gods wait, we are the gods. We just forgot who we are. That's crazy. So the shapes, the forms they created were based on already existing animals, perhaps. See that? Look at this. This is from Kukutan. And we're looking at this little container vessel. I don't even know what to call it. I guess you could call it like a cabinet. Or perhaps for shrine offerings or something. But you have this circular pattern here, and in the very middle you have the yin yang symbol. That's crazy. So there you have it. A lot of things that they say, oh, that belongs to Asian cultures and Asian religions like Buddhism or whatever. What is it doing on a piece of pottery from a neolithic civilization coming from what is now today Romania? That's just crazy. On to chapter 3.